For the mock interviews, homework number 9, you need to submit that before Wednesday the 23rd at 3:30. So that's next Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. So you'll need to submit the mock interview assignment to Blackboard for that. So you're going to notice two things in the grade book related to the mock interview. There's going to be the assignment that, your response, and then there's the score that the evaluator gave you for the interview itself. There will be 2 items in the grade book for that. And then there will be an assignment related to today's class, which will be the final assignment of the semester that will be due on Friday, the last day of classes. So I'm going to be giving you a lecture today related to engineering licensure and taking the FE exam and so on, and then you'll have the whole rest of the semester to finish that. So are there any questions related to announcements?
Will we meet in person after this class?
We will. We're going to meet in person the week after Thanksgiving. That'll be our last class meeting, but we will not have a final exam. Let me make sure that that is the case, but I'm pretty sure that we do not have an exam in this class. Open up the syllabus here and just make sure that there's no grade component related. Nope, attendance and assignments. So we will meet 2 weeks from today. 1 week from today, the university is closed because of Thanksgiving, right? Everybody already knew that? Good. All right. But 2 weeks from today, we will meet, and it'll be our last class meeting. All right. Any other questions related to schedule and announcement type stuff? All right. What we're going to be talking about today is professional licensure and how the engineering profession is governed both in West Virginia, and a lot of the things that I say about engineering licensure are also applicable to other states. Every state has its own professional engineering board that regulates the profession, but a lot of the laws are very similar. And the exams are national, and the engineering accreditation is national. So although it's not universal, every aspect of what I'll tell you today, it is broadly applicable across the country. So my recommendation would be to take notes through today because it's going to be useful for the assignment that I create related to this lecture. Now, you can go through engineering school and decide not to become professionally licensed. And you can go through and finish your degree at Marshall without taking the Fundamentals of Engineering exam. That's an optional thing. There are some engineering programs that require students to take the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, but ours is not a program that requires that. It's optional. So there are some reasons to go above and beyond the bare minimum, and the first and foremost would be that professional engineers who are licensed earn more money, especially in civil engineering. Licensure is valuable in other disciplines as well, but it's particularly critical in civil engineering. If you have a license, that offers you more career flexibility, and there are many positions which are only open to licensed engineers. And so even if you're not licensed in engineering, you can probably find some kind of a job. But especially when it comes to federal and state employment, there are a lot of positions that require an engineer to have that licensure. And I think it's a way to set yourself apart from other people who can't pass the exam, or who didn't take the time to pass the exam, I guess I should say, because anybody could pass the exam who's been through the 4-year engineering program and spend some time studying, but I think that in some cases people just get distracted by other things in life, or it's not a priority for them, so they haven't bothered to become an engineer in training and pass the Fundamentals of Engineering exam. And if you do, then it's just another thing that you could put on your resume that shows that you're meeting the expectations of the profession. It's also an aspect of showing that you're continuing to get career development and ongoing professional development through the years, because if you get fully licensed as an engineer, there are ongoing continuing education requirements, and so it's a way to enhance your job security by keeping the license and showing that you're staying current with your knowledge of technical things. Finally, being a licensed professional is something that's respected by the public. You know, having some letters at the end of your name, like whether it's PhD or PE or MD. There's a lot of letters that people put after their names, and the letters that engineers put after their name is PE, professional engineer. And so we're going to talk today about the difference between PE and FE, the difference between EIT and PPE. There's a couple of different abbreviations, and so the first thing that we're talking about, the first step on the road to licensure, is passing the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, FE. And by passing the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, you're eligible to become an engineer in training, an EIT. So we'll talk all about that process in a step-by-step way. And just a little bit of a disclaimer here is that the West Virginia PE Board is who sets the rules, and so I'm going to do my best to describe what their expectations and what their process is, but the definitive guide for what you need to do to become licensed is on the PE Board's website. And so they may change from time to time their expectations and their process, and so that's where you should look when it is actually time for you to go through this process and apply. So let's talk about the steps. The first of the requirements is to earn a 4-year ABET accredited engineering degree. And each one of you is enrolled in a program that has an ABET accredited engineering degree. The second step within this two-part process is to pass the Fundamentals of Engineering exam. Next, apply for engineering intern status. Once you've passed the FE exam and once you have your degree, you can apply for engineering intern status. And they will wait until you have finished your degree to process your application if you happen to apply before you've graduated, or we had one of our early graduates of the civil engineering program apply for his EIT certification, but it wasn't processed until our program became fully accredited, and we had the notice for that. And that happened back in October. So you apply by submitting the application and the required materials to the Board of Registration. Now, this takes you through the engineering intern, sometimes also known as the engineer in training certification. And as an engineer in training or as an engineer intern, some states call it one thing, other states call it another. After a certain number of years of experience, in the state of West Virginia, it's 4 years of experience, then you're eligible to apply for professional engineering licensure. You can pass the Principles and Practice of Engineering exam in a lot of states, including West Virginia, even before you've completed the 4 years of experience. So in theory, you could take the FE exam maybe in your senior year or shortly after graduating, and then just a couple of months later you could take the Principles and Practice of Engineering exam, and then you'd still have to wait the 4 years to get your experience, and then you can submit the application, the fees, the documentation, and so on to the State Board of Registration. Now, some states require you to get the 4 years before you take the test. Others don't have that requirement. So, for example, I took the Principles and Practice of Engineering exam, I guess it was less than a year after I finished my degree. I wanted to take it quick while I was still in the academic mindset, and you could do the same thing in West Virginia. So those are the steps that would lead you towards becoming a professional engineer. Are there any questions so far on what's the benefit or what's the requirements or expectation? Here's a list of the accredited programs at Marshall. This is straight off the ABET website. I went and did a screen capture today just to illustrate that the biomedical engineering degree is accredited. You can see that it's from October 1st, 2020 to the present. The civil engineering BSCE degree, same applicable dates. And even though we didn't have our visit from ABET until, I guess we had our accreditation visit in 2021, what they do is they go back and they would, I guess, backdate the accreditation to the people who've graduated with the degree during the period of study. So we had to submit like a report to ABET. They came and did a visit, an inspection, interviews. It's a whole lengthy process, but the point is everyone who's ever graduated with a civil engineering degree from Marshall is eligible for the licensure because they have an accredited degree. Computer science is also accredited, although in the case of non-engineering programs, ABET accreditation is a little bit less important. They still went through the added step of becoming accredited just to kind of stand above the crowd and show some distinction. You can see electrical and computer is also ABET accredited, on down the list through and including the occupational safety and health program. Now, a lot of students don't know about occupational safety and health. It's a really valuable degree program that's available here at Marshall. It's within, right now, the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. And for people who kind of get hung up on calculus or chemistry, but still want to have a career in industry, kind of quantitatively based, the Occupational Safety and Health program can be a really good degree because it offers salaries that are equivalent and sometimes even higher than engineering salaries. And it's really a hands-on kind of degree where you're learning a lot about safety-related equipment and how to be a safety professional in manufacturing, in mines, on construction sites, and so on. So I always like to draw a little bit of attention to the Occupational Safety and Health program because it doesn't get as much visibility as the engineering programs that a lot of people already know about. So here's a little bit of information about the fundamentals of engineering exam. It's put together by NCEES. That's one of those abbreviations that used to stand for something, but now it doesn't anymore. You know, like KFC used to stand for Kentucky Fried Chicken, but now officially it just stands for KFC.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that's so weird.
It is very weird. So this used to stand for the National Council for the Examination of Engineers and Surveyors, but it doesn't stand for that anymore. It just stands for NCEES. Weird, right? ABET's the same way. ABET used to stand for the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, but now it's just ABET, and it doesn't mean anything other than ABET. So it's kind of funny. Yeah, corporate branding or something. But NCES is an organization that I've volunteered with for more than 10 years. I go down to their headquarters a couple times each year, and I write questions that go on to the exam. When I got started at NCES, what I did was I would go down and take the exam before they sent it out for the students to take. I was a pre-tester, and it was really interesting. I liked it a lot. I kind of missed the fact that I don't get to take tests anymore. Now I just grade tests, and I don't know. Taking tests, I think, is a lot more fun than grading them. But this exam is computer-based, and what you have to do is you have to go to a test center to take this exam. And I'll go to the website here, and you can see where some of the test centers in the area are. There's one that's based in Charleston, but there's others as well. A lot of students decide to take the exam, for example, during the holiday breaks. So if we just looked at Columbus, you can see that there are going to be a couple of test centers in the Columbus area. I think you have to type in Charleston maybe to get ours. I spelled Charleston wrong, I think. But it figured it out. So here's one in Lexington. I think there's one in Lexington. Boy, this is a weird map. It's not showing them all. Roanoke, Morgantown. So they're around. The closest one's in Charleston. And the exam is scheduled for 6 hours. You block out 6 hours of time, and you're actually taking questions for 5 hours and 20 minutes. And it's computer-based, which means that every examinee has a slightly different test. There's a pool of questions, and when you sit down, it builds your test out of this pool of questions, and it randomly selects a certain number of questions within, like, the math category. And it selects a certain number of questions within, let's say, statics. a certain number of questions within environmental engineering, if you're in the civil discipline. And luckily, it's not an adaptive exam. An adaptive exam is one where, as you're doing correctly, it starts giving you progressively more difficult questions. It doesn't do that, fortunately, because those are really exhausting. When you get something right, the questions get harder. This is just like, it builds the exam. You can flip back and forth through them. You could like leave one blank and come back to it later. I'll show you, this is called the exam spec, the specification on how many questions come from each category. And so, for example, in the civil engineering exam, you can see that many of the questions are related to just general topics like math. There's some engineering ethics and professional practice questions, and there are some topics that are on multiple exams. So you'll notice, for example, engineering economics is both on the civil exam, it's also on the electrical exam. If we flip over to the mechanical engineering, they also have engineering economics. So there are certain topics that are on each of the exams, and then certain things that are just unique to that particular discipline. So using geotechnical engineering as an example, that would appear on the civil engineering exam, but geotechnical isn't going to be on electrical and computer. It's not going to be on the mechanical exam. So they're all a little bit different, but you know going in the range of how many questions could come from each topic. But in total, you have 110 questions. And so 110 questions with only 5 hours and 20 minutes, that means that each one of these questions is designed to take examinees 4 minutes or less. And so they're relatively simple questions. They're not really complicated where you're going to have to go through lots of conversions and lots of different steps. There'd usually at most be 1 or 2 units conversions. You'd maybe have to just do sometimes 2 or 3 steps at most. And there's a supplied reference manual that you can use as you're working on the exam. Let me show you what the reference manual looks like. As you're sitting down at the computer at the testing center, they give you basically a searchable PDF, and you can go through that, and it's really long. It's 500 pages long. And so luckily you can search by word. So like if I have a search for what would be a good thing to search for, maybe Bernoulli's. So here's the Bernoulli equation. There's going to be multiple places that it appears in the exam spec, but here's the version of the Bernoulli's equation that I'd use to actually solve a problem. So sometimes when you're going through the test, in the question statement, it will have some phrase that you can put into the reference manual, and then that'll help you to find the formula that applies. It's also a good idea to study for the test and to download this reference manual in advance, and it's free. You can do that. You could get it now if you want, and begin to familiarize yourself with what the equation looks like, because sometimes the equations in this reference manual are going to look a little bit different than the version of the equation that is in your textbook. Let me see. Okay, I just saw environmental engineering questions as I was flipping through stuff here. Okay. So here's the environmental engineering, and I've written questions in the environmental engineering area before. This is all questions related to air quality here. So these diagrams is what you'd use if you wanted to find out, like if a smoke plume was diffusing out into the atmosphere, how thick would the smoke be a certain distance downstream from the, here's the Gaussian dispersion model. So this formula, it looks similar to what you'd find in the environmental engineering book that I use when I teach atmospheric modeling, but like it may not say C on the left-hand side of the equation. It would maybe use a different variable for that. So it's a good idea to just go through the exam in advance and be the supplied reference manual in advance and just become familiar with what the variable definitions are and and the format of the equations, because it's usually a little bit different than what you might be expecting. So any questions so far about the exam? Okay. So like I mentioned before, students usually take the Fundamentals of Engineering exam during their senior year, although we had one student who took it during the first semester of his junior year, way earlier than he should have, but somehow he managed to pass. I guess he's just a good test taker. If you don't pass the exam, then you can take it again, but you can take the exam no more than 3 times in 12 months. And since I volunteered down at NCES, they sometimes tell us the statistics on the pass rate. And in the exam that I write for, the environmental exam, about 78% of test takers pass it on their first try, and then on the second try, it's about the same. So of those who didn't pass the exam, when they take it a second time, about 70-something% pass it after their first time. But there are some people who will take the exam again and again and again and somehow never manage to pass it. And usually it's because they didn't study in between. They just are hoping that they can take the exam enough times that they'll get the knack for it. The exam costs $175, and you have to pay that when you register for the test. But if you pass it, then the university will reimburse you. And that's a new decision that our dean's just made, that he's going to reimburse any student who passes the FE exam. So that's really great. It's like a bonus $175 in your pocket. Once you register for the exam, then you get an authorization code that allows you to schedule it with Pearson, and then they'll send you a confirmation letter via email that says the date and time and location of your appointment. So it's all pretty straightforward process. They'll do it in a testing center where there's someone who's kind of monitoring and keeping track on everybody. They record as you are taking the test. They have cameras everywhere to have evidence if somebody's cheating, you know. There was an incident a few years ago where somebody was caught cheating at the exam, and this was back in the days when the exam was administered on paper rather than electronically on computer. And back in the days of the paper test, everyone got the same questions. And a certain number of the questions on the paper test are recycled. Those were called equators back in those days. And they would recycle those questions because they wanted to know, like, if a certain group of people, a population taking the test, did really poorly on the equators, then you'd know that this is maybe just a stupid group, you know, because the equators you give every time, and you'd know what the typical performance is on the equators, and you'd use the performance on the rest of the exam as like how you determine their grade, but the equators are kind of how you calibrate each group who takes the test. So anyway, someone was cheating, and they were actually scanning. I think they had like a little scanner on their hand, and they were swiping their hand across the exam paper, and they were stealing the questions. And because that happened, the NCES had to basically stop using a bunch of questions that took a long time to develop. And I think this person who was caught cheating during the exam, they had like millions of dollars of penalties that got levied against them. Like their salary is going to be garnished for the rest of their life in penalties. So nowadays, I think the risk of exam breach isn't as high as it used to be because of the computer-based test, but they definitely, these exam proctors will keep an eagle eye on people because it's really important for the test to be an accurate representation of how people do, and for those test questions to remain confidential. So it's a serious environment. They have lockers for you to put your phone away, and they have pretty strict rules on what calculator you could use, for example. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Here's the website that you use to register for the exam. We were just looking at it, and the reference handbooks are also available through the NCES website. And I have already opened that up to show you what the reference handbooks look like. It's just hundreds and hundreds of equations from lots of different engineering disciplines. Now, in the old days when it was a paper-based test, it was only offered twice a year. And if you got sick on the exam day, you had to wait 6 months to take the test again. Now the exam is effectively open year-round, And so you can schedule it on a day that works best for you, and if you get sick, you can reschedule. I think there's a small fee if you need to reschedule the exam to a different day, but it's much better than just losing the entirety of your registration fee. They say that when you take the test that you should bring the confirmation letter, approved calculator, ID, and then just stuff to keep comfortable. But then there's a lot of stuff that you're not allowed to bring into the exam room, such as cell phones, any sort of electronic items that could be used to make a copy of the test, smart watches. You're not supposed to take food or drinks into the exam room, and so on. So here's a list of the acceptable calculators, and it's a pretty small list, actually. Casio, HP, and Texas Instruments make approved calculators, and everything else is not allowed. So obviously you can't use your cell phone as a calculator during the FE exam. You'd have to use one of these calculators. And this is the calculator that they encourage students to buy and use during the Engineering 111 class. So if you still have that calculator from Engineering 111, you could use it during the FE exam. Okay, so engineering intern certification is available to you after you've passed the FE exam and you've got your ABET accredited degree. And so to apply, you send the application to the State Board of Registration for Professional Engineers. And so let's open up their website, the West Virginia Professional Engineering Board. And over here on the left-hand side is where you can get all of the application forms. So if you want to apply for the engineering intern certification, you'd click on the left on engineering intern, and it's got the reference forms that have to be filled out by people who know you. You have to submit, I think, 3 references. It's got the application form itself, and then a description of the fees. So they ask you all sorts of questions about your background, if you've ever had like a criminal conviction or a disciplinary hearing from another engineering licensure board, and so on. Here's the reference form that I was mentioning. At the engineering intern level, your references don't have to be licensed engineers, but when you're applying to become a fully licensed engineer, to have your PE certification, you have to have gotten your 4 years of experience under the supervision of licensed engineers. And so in those cases, the references for the professional engineering certification have to be licensed engineers themselves. When you apply, then the things that you have to submit are the application, which will be notarized, and you can go to a bank or sometimes like I think maybe over in Old Main in the registrar's office, there's a notary there. You have to submit a photo, application fee, your score report, transcripts from the university proving that you've got an ABET accredited degree, and then the reference forms from people who know you. Now, the 4 years of experience that you have to get to apply for licensure as a professional engineer should be under the supervision of someone else who is themselves a professional engineer. And the experience has to be engineering experience. It couldn't be experience doing non-engineering work. If you go on to get an advanced degree, then a master's degree counts as a year of experience, a PhD counts as another year of experience, but you'd still need to get real-world practical engineering experience before you'd be able to apply to become a professional engineer. So at the level of the PE, professional engineer, rather than the engineering intern level, the application fee is a little bit higher. That one's $80. But you have to submit similar things as before: transcripts, score report, photograph, notarized application form. And then of the 5 reference forms you have to submit, 3 of them should be licensed PEs who have some direct understanding of the experience that you've gotten as an engineer. You also, in the application, have to outline all of the places that you've worked and have to show how your time and experience adds up to at least the minimum 4 years of experience. And so they'll ask you the day, month, and year that you started working at one place, and then you go through the process of just kind of tallying up all of the engineering experience that you've gotten over the years. Now, although the FE exam has different tests based on whether you're civil, mechanical, electrical, the Principles and Practice of Engineering exam that you take to become licensed as a PE goes into even more specific detail. So instead of just having one civil engineering exam for all civil engineers, there's different afternoon sections that you can take depending on your specialty within civil engineering. So there's a common morning test for all civil engineers, but then in the afternoon you'd have a different exam if you were water resources and environmental compared to if you were getting the afternoon exam specializing in structural engineering. The same thing is true of other disciplines as well. Within mechanical engineering, for example, there's one test that you could take if your specialty was HVAC and refrigeration, a different one, machine design and materials, a different one if it's thermal and fluid systems. So the advantage of that is you don't have to know so much about a big range of topics. The questions are a little bit more difficult and a little bit more lengthy for the Principles and Practices of Engineering exam, but you'll presumably know more about your own specialized subdiscipline. So I felt like that this test was easier, in fact. I felt like the Principles and Practices of Engineering exam was easier for me than the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, because on the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, there was just a bunch of like basic math questions. There was questions related to stuff that I didn't know that well. Like I don't know structural engineering very well because my focus is environmental and water resources. And so I really struggled on some of the geotechnical questions. But I didn't have to deal with any of those when I was working on the Principles and Practice of Engineering exam. Although I did forget my calculator for the Principles and Practice of Engineering exam, so that kind of threw me for a loop. I had to go to there was a hotel across from the place where I was taking the test, and I just borrowed like the desk clerk's calculator at the hotel, and luckily it was good enough. I was able to pass. So some related issues to licensure and taking the test. For the FE exam, it's nationally administered. So even though West Virginia has its own rules in terms of the number of references you have to supply, and the application form is specific to West Virginia, the test that people are taking to get their West Virginia engineering intern is the same exam as the test everywhere else. Everyone uses the same national exam developed by NCES. And the account that you set up when you are registering for the FE exam can be very useful, not just to look up your results, but also as you go through your career, you have to earn continuing education credits. You have to every year get some courses that will keep you current in your discipline, and NCES has a tool where you can type in what your continuing education credit hours were, and it's just a simple way to document all of your professional development efforts. There's a word that's called comedy, and it's not the stuff that's funny. This comedy just means basically getting your license or your credentials recognized in another jurisdiction. And so reciprocity is just another word for that same thing. That is the process of using your credentials, for example, in West Virginia in order to become a professional engineer in Ohio. I actually did it the reverse. I had my license in Ohio for years and years before I got my West Virginia license. And so when I did get my West Virginia license, the process was a little bit easier than it would be if I was applying to get a PE license for the very first time. Because each state has some basic recognition of the credentials by other states, and then it's just a little bit of a more streamlined process if you're applying for reciprocity than if you were applying for a new PE license for the first time. So don't wait to go through the process of becoming an engineer intern. Because the longer you wait, the more you're going to forget. And even if you're working as an engineer, probably you're going to be working on a pretty narrow range of topics. And especially in the case of the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, it's a really broad test. And so you should take the exam as soon as you've gone through the courses that relate to the material. So if we go back through this exam spec, once you've taken the courses that apply to these topics, that's when you should take the test. But don't wait a long time afterwards, because you're going to start forgetting stuff, and then the test will be harder than it otherwise needs to be. So don't wait is the good advice. And the other reason why you shouldn't wait is just because it's harder to get the reference letters when you don't know, like the professors who you took classes from can't provide as clear a reference for you. And I guess that's all I have to say on this slide. So just to talk a little bit more about exam decoupling, I think I mentioned earlier that in some states they make you wait for 4 years to take the exam, but now West Virginia has decoupled, where you can take the Principles and Practice of Engineering exam even before you have earned the 4 years of experience. And so that's just another way to apply that don't procrastinate advice, is to consider taking the PE exam as soon as you're able to. This is kind of an interesting figure that illustrates the number of people who take the exam and how long they waited in order to take the test, as well as the pass rate. So over here on the right-hand axis is what you're reading the red line from, the pass rate. And it shows that people who take the Principles of Engineering test after 0 years of experience, they only have a pass rate of about 1/3. But the pass rate is the highest for people who've got 4 to 5 years of experience. Then the pass rate starts to decline the further away you get from when you were in school, or the longer that you wait to take the test. People just get in kind of a rut in their professional careers doing the same kind of projects and not getting as much wide exposure, and that's probably why the pass rates decrease over time. You can, once you earn the license, keep track of your continuing education efforts on the NCES website, and that's valuable because every 2 years you have to reapply and pay a fee. So here's my license details. You can see that I was originally licensed in West Virginia in 2010, and my current license is valid through the end of this year, and then I have to pay the $70 fee again, and I have to go through and illustrate to the state what I've been doing to remain current in my discipline. So I'll have to go through and tell them what continuing education classes I've been to and so on. So I wish they didn't charge $70. I never loved paying that, but it's not too expensive. It's less than $3 a month, and it gives you the legal right to practice engineering in the state. And of course, if you practice engineering without a license, then that's illegal and subject to criminal prosecution and penalties that are applied by the West Virginia PE Board. So it's important to keep this up to date. All right. So are there any questions related to the PE exam or the process to become licensed in West Virginia? Yes.
The only question I really have is, like, say when you get your license and you say you have to renew it.
Yeah.
What happens if you forget to renew it and you pass your due date?
Yeah. If you forget, they send you a reminder. Okay. Because last time, I don't know where they sent my renewal reminder to. They said they sent it in the mail, but I never got it. So I got an email like in the middle of December from the West Virginia people saying, hey, warning, it's about to expire. So I came close to missing mine last time around, but like if I had missed that email and forgotten, that's a good question. I don't think they make you take the test over again.
Okay, I was hoping that's all.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll find out and I'll let you know when we meet for class in 2 weeks. I'll ask them what happens if people forget. My guess is probably they just give you a penalty fee or something. But boy, that'd be the worst if you had to take the test all over again. Or maybe I should force myself to do that because I like taking the test. So I'll just let my license lap, and then that'll give me a reason to go in there and take the exam once again.
Hey, if it works, it works.
Yep. Okay, so remember the things that you've got on your docket right now, since all of you have already finished your interviews, then what you have is this mock interview homework number 9. You need to submit that by next Wednesday. 2 weeks from today, after the Thanksgiving break, we'll be back in class. We'll have one last lecture. And then homework 10, which is related to today's class, I'll put that up later this afternoon, and that's going to be due by the last day of classes, Friday, December 2nd. All right, so that's it for today. I'll see you in 2 weeks.